Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and I teach theology. This is a podcast on the StarCrest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 63 and we're covering we're on day 341 and we're covering Gaudium et Spes 63. Got those two mixed up. And this is on economics is an important area of human endeavor. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we spoke about culture can be a challenge, but we need to approach and engage so we can present the gospel to our scientific culture. Today, we start chapter 3, Economics and Social Life, and we'll cover all this chapter before the sections in this chapter. The summary is, dignity is the goal of economics, and the church provides guidance in this time of economic uncertainty. Paragraph 63 has 5 subparagraphs we'll read individually. A, dignity is the focus of economics for man. B, economics are increasingly complex. C, people are anxious about the economy and can make it too much of their identity. D, economic disparities between industries, regions, and countries is an issue. And E, church will set forward principles about such economic situations. So as a review, 63A is about dignity as the focus for economics for man. I think this subparagraph sets forward our kind of theme for the whole of this chapter, which will take us about the next week. I think it was eight episodes. It's about a week. I might be out by 1 or 2 saying 8, but about a week anyways. So, 63A, let's read it. In the economic and social realms too, the dignity and complete vocation of the human person and the welfare of society as a whole are to be respected and promoted. For man is the source, the center, and the purpose of all economic and social life. This is important, this idea that we go back to over and over again in this document about dignity. This is a key principle again, because economics is for man and not man for economics. The goal of economics is to promote human dignity, to promote men, not an end in itself, or not men are just homo economicus, men for the economy. One of the errors, one of the issues with, say, Marxism, is that it makes man, individual men, as directed towards the whole of the state, the economy. And that's a problem. Now, here, we also note this idea of dignity has been brought up before because it's the basis of why the church can talk about all this. Because we're all made in the image of likeness of God, and a bunch of images of likeness of God are doing something. Therefore, there is something theology can say about it, even if it is a somewhat human, quote-unquote, issue. And obviously, societies, economies need to respect and promote dignity. That's kind of an overarching theme of this whole document and how you would expect this chapter to say if you've been following along. 63b talks about how economics are increasingly complex. Just remember this was written in the 1960s, and now in the 2020s, it's even more complex than it was back then. Let's read 63b. Like other areas of social life, the economy today is marked by man's increased dominion over nature, by closer and more intense relationship between citizens, groups, and countries, and their mutual dependence, by the increased intervention of the state. At the same time, progress in the methods of production and in the exchange of goods and services has made the economy an instrument capable of better meeting the intensified needs of the human family. Economics has gotten more and more complex. We have all these things, and many of them are good. I'm just looking at my my computer screen here, while I'm recording this, and it has all these parts coming from all these different places. Or even like my mug here on the table. It's a thermal mug that I got at Walmart. This mug, it's not it cost me almost nothing. It cost me like $8 at Walmart or something. And it's something that would be amazing to someone like in my grandfather's generation when he was there, growing up before World War II. But today, even someone who is very responsible following a vow of poverty like myself, I bought it kind of on a whim at Walmart, kind of as an impulse purchase, because it's like, oh, I would be using one of those. One of those would be quite useful. And today, there's so much in the economics. I know I've gone to retreat, I've sent a donation via PayPal and all the kind of connections to get there, all the electronics for that, right? That it comes out of my account, goes through MasterCard or Visa, and then goes through PayPal and then to their account and all that. That's super complex. I don't fully understand how that works. I just know it works. Moving on to 63C. People are anxious about the economy and can make the economy too much of their identity. Let's read it. Reasons for anxiety, however, are not lacking. Many people, especially in economically advanced areas, seem, as it were, to be ruled by economics, so that almost their entire personal and social life is permeated with a certain economic way of thinking. Such is true of both of nations that favor a collective economy and of others. At the very time the development of economic life could mitigate social inequalities, provided that it be guided and coordinated in a reasonable human way, it is often made to embitter them, or in place it even results in a decline of social status of the underprivileged and in contempt for the poor. While an intense number of people still lack the absolute necessities of life, some, even in less advanced areas, live in luxury or squander wealth. Extravagance and wretchedness exist side by side. While a few enjoy very great power of choice, the majority are deprived of almost all possibility of acting on their own initiative and responsibility, and often subsist in living and working conditions unworthy of the human person. Thinking back again to my grandfather, as an example here, because I'd used him in the last one, he basically worked for 2 different companies for his entire life, his entire career. He got his PhD in chemistry or chemical engineering, and then he worked for one kind of researcher in one company, a researcher in a second company, and by that time he was 65 and I was about to be born. And that was his whole adult life. Whereas today, how many people have 5, 10 plus employers, right? And this creates a lot more anxiety about work and about economics. If you think, oh, your employer, you're disposable, your employer can cash you off and things like that. Today, even compared back to the 1960s, there is a huge deficit for young people buying houses. The multiple of an average person's income, the houses are much less affordable today. Just taking the average salary, multiplying it, how many times you have to multiply it to get a house. Houses are much less affordable now than they were in the 60s. And that makes it harder. Economics inevitably are going to have some who are richer, some who are poor. That's not necessarily a problem. The issue comes in when you have the opulence, and the opulence is taking away from something, and that's really a problem. There's less of a duty for those who are further away from us. I have much more duty to my family, to the people I actually see in person, than to, say, a random person who's starving on the other side of the world. And in thinking on that, a government does too, and the government has to regulate these different things. Because there is this thing where there's, the person's starving, the other person's having caviar and lobster flown in next door. There's something unjust about that. Now, obviously, we aren't here to talk about exact ratios. The church has never been super specific on that, leaving it a little bit to economists, to prudence, to the fact that, for example, in our own society, even the poor are not so bad off. So that ratio, if the rich are making so much ratio more, it's not as much of a problem as if the poor are actually starving, which is pretty rare in this country. Finally, that notes that many are deprived of economic freedoms. 2 sentences back, I said this country, obviously I'm living in the U.S., but I think that would apply to where most of my listeners are: Canada, U.S., UK, Australia, New Zealand, etc. Moving on to 63D, economic disparities between industries and communities is an issue. D, a similar lack of economic and social balance is to be noticed between agricultural industry and the services, and also in different parts of one and the same country. The contrast between the economically more advanced countries and other countries is becoming more serious day by day, and the very peace in the world can be jeopardized thereby. At that time and today, you can note a wide economic imbalance in the world. There are still child slaves today, and yet we are living in a very comfortable lifestyle. I think it's good. We should do what we can, or what's reasonable with all other responsibilities, to try and reduce there being child slaves. Unfortunately, most of us, possibly all of us who are listening, don't have much power to actually change that. The more of us we get together, the more power we have, though. Now, some is obviously inherited, but there is that responsibility of governments and the responsibility of the rich themselves to give a proportionate amount to the poor, because when the people around them don't have enough to live on, that which, even though it's legally theirs, is not theirs by right, by principle. It belongs to the poor person. St. Basil the Great says that. Anyways, let's move on to 63E. On the church will set forward principles about such economic situations. Let's begin. Our contemporaries are coming to feel these inequalities with an ever sharper awareness, since they are thoroughly convinced that the ampler technical and economic possibilities, which the world of today joins and can and should correct this unhappy state of affairs. Hence, many reforms in the socioeconomic realm and a change of mentality and attitude are required of all. For this reason, the Church, down through the centuries and in the light of the gospel, has worked out the principles of justice and equity demanded by right reason, both for individual and social life and for international life, and she has proclaimed them especially in recent times. This sacred council intends to strengthen these principles according to the circumstances of this age and set forth certain guidelines, especially with regard to the requirements of economic development. So this paragraph or subparagraph has two main parts. People are becoming more aware of economic issues. I think even today, even more so, we have more people educated who understand this. And there is a change in economics, a new mentality. There was no in the 1960s. I think the different issues are a bit different today. We don't have as big of a communist bloc. Communism is still prevalent in other ways, but not in the way of like half of Europe being communist. Then the second half of this subparagraph is about how the church has always proclaimed the gospel. Even in things like economics, it don't seem like the primary goal of proclaiming the gospel. The church is going to proclaim them. And in this chapter, what we're going to do is we're going to set forward principles for better economics, which is a mode of proclaiming the gospel. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest boost it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time month to join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow we're going to continue with the next paragraphs of Gaudium Spes, 64 and 65 on economic development. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which will provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan. Amen.